Marcus Williams stepped out of his Lamborghini Aventador and stared at the imposing glass facade of the Grandview Hotel, one of the most exclusive establishments in Manhattan. The valet rushed forward, but Marcus waved him away with a subtle gesture. Tonight wasn't about luxury cars or designer suits. Tonight was about something far more valuable than the billions sitting in his bank account. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrinkled $20 bill, worn jeans, and a faded T-shirt he'd picked up from a thrift store that morning. In 30 minutes, Marcus Williams, CEO of Williams Industries and one of the youngest black billionaires in America, would cease to exist. In his place would stand Mike, a struggling construction worker looking for any job that could help him survive another month. Before we dive into this incredible story that will challenge everything you think you know about human nature, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in humanity in ways you never expected. And drop a comment telling me about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness. Trust me, you'll understand why I'm asking by the end of this story. Marcus had spent the last 3 months planning this experiment. After reading countless reports about income inequality and social prejudice, after watching his own employees treat him differently once they learned about his wealth, he needed to know the truth. How do people really treat those they perceive as beneath them? How do they treat those they think have nothing to offer? The idea had consumed him, especially after a board meeting where he'd overheard 2 executives laughing about how they'd never hire someone who looked like they shopped at discount stores. He changed clothes in his car, messing up his usually perfectly groomed hair and rubbing some dirt on his hands. The transformation was startling. Gone was the confident billionaire who commanded boardrooms. In his place stood someone society would likely overlook, dismiss, or worse. Marcus looked at himself in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. This was exactly what he wanted. The Grandview Hotel was hosting its annual charity gala that evening, an event Marcus had attended every year for the past decade, always as the guest of honor, always writing checks with more zeros than most people saw in their lifetime. Tonight, he would enter through the service entrance, applying for a temporary position as a janitor. The hotel manager, Patricia Thornfield, had posted the job that morning, desperate for last-minute help for the gala. She had no idea that the man about to walk through her doors could buy her hotel with the money he spent on lunch. Marcus approached the service entrance, his heart pounding with an emotion he hadn't felt in years: nervousness. When was the last time he'd been nervous about anything? When was the last time he'd faced the possibility of rejection? The metal door was heavy, and he had to pull hard to open it. The contrast between the gleaming lobby he was used to and this stark, fluorescent-lit corridor was jarring. "You hear about the janitor position?" The voice belonged to a security guard who looked Marcus up and down with barely concealed disdain. The man's name tag read Steve, and his expression suggested he'd already made up his mind about the applicant in front of him. "Yes, sir, I saw the posting online. I really need this job." Marcus was surprised by how naturally the desperation crept into his voice. Maybe it wasn't entirely fake. Maybe he really did need this, just not in the way Steve assumed. Steve snorted. "Yeah, well, get in line. Half the city needs a job. Follow me, but don't touch anything, Mrs. Thornfield is busy, so you'll wait until she has time for you." As they walked through the service corridors, Marcus observed everything with new eyes. He'd never seen this part of his favorite hotel. The walls were painted a dull beige, the floors were scuffed linoleum, and the air smelled of industrial cleaning products. It was a different world, existing just feet away from the marble and gold of the guest areas. Steve led him to a small break room where 3 other people were waiting, 2 men and 1 woman, all looking tired, all clutching crumpled resumes. Marcus sat down on a plastic chair that had seen better days and tried to blend in. The woman next to him, probably in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, smiled at him. "First time here?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am. You?" "Third. They keep saying they'll call, but..." She shrugged with the resignation of someone who'd heard too many empty promises. "I'm Elena, by the way. Elena Rodriguez." "Mike," Marcus replied, using the alias he'd chosen. "Mike Johnson." Elena nodded. "Well, Mike, I hope we both get lucky today. My daughter's starting college next month, and I need this job more than I need my next breath." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Here was a real person with real struggles, sitting next to someone who could solve all her problems with a single phone call. But that wasn't the point of this experiment. He needed to see how the world treated Mike Johnson, not how it would react to Marcus Williams playing savior. The break room door swung open, and a woman in an expensive suit strode in. Patricia Thornfield was exactly what Marcus expected. Perfectly coiffed, designer everything, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. She looked at the four applicants like she was inspecting livestock. "I need this done quickly," she announced without preamble. "The gala starts in 4 hours, and I have real problems to deal with. She pointed at Elena. "You've been here before. Didn't work out then, won't work out now. You can leave." Elena's face fell, but she gathered her purse with dignity. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Thornfield. Don't thank me. Thank yourself for wasting it." Patricia's voice was ice cold. Marcus watched Eleanor walk away, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and felt anger building in his chest. He'd seen Patricia at dozens of charity events, always talking about helping the less fortunate, always posing for photos with her generous donations. The hypocrisy was staggering. Patricia turned to the two other men. "You two look like you might actually be able to lift a mop bucket. You're hired, temporary, minimum wage, and if you break anything, it comes out of your pay." She looked at Marcus last, her lip curling slightly. "And you, what makes you think you can handle this job?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I'm willing to work hard, ma'am. I need this opportunity." "Opportunity!" Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "This isn't an opportunity. It's manual labor. But fine, you can start in the kitchen. If you last 2 hours without the chef throwing you out, we'll talk." The kitchen of the Grandview Hotel was a symphony of controlled chaos. Chefs shouted orders, servers rushed in and out with trays, and the heat from the ovens made the air shimmer. Marcus was handed a mop and bucket and pointed toward the dish pit, where mountains of plates, glasses, and silverware waited to be cleaned. "You're the new guy?" The voice belonged to a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and wearing the standard-issue uniform of the hotel's housekeeping staff. Her name tag read Carmen, and unlike everyone else Marcus had encountered, her smile seemed genuine. "Yes, I'm Mike. Just started." "Well, Mike, welcome to the glamorous world of hotel service." Carmen's tone was light, but Marcus could see the tiredness in her eyes. "I'm Carmen. I work housekeeping, but I help out wherever they need me. Fair warning, the kitchen can be brutal, especially on gala nights." As if summoned by her words, a large man in chef's whites appeared, his face red with exertion and anger. "You the new dishwasher? About time. We're drowning here, and I don't have time to train anybody. Figure it out or get out." Chef Morrison was exactly the kind of person Marcus had dealt with in his business life, just in a different context. Demanding, impatient, and convinced that volume could substitute for leadership. Marcus nodded and got to work, loading dishes into the industrial washing machine and trying to keep up with the constant stream of dirty plates. The work was harder than he'd expected. His hands, soft from years of boardroom meetings and golf games, quickly became raw from the hot water and harsh detergent. His back ached from bending over the sink, and sweat dripped into his eyes. But what struck him most was how invisible he'd become. Servers rushed past him without acknowledgement. Chefs barked orders around him as if he wasn't there, and managers walked through the kitchen without even glancing in his direction. "Here, try these." Carmen appeared beside him, holding out a pair of rubber gloves. "They'll help with the water temperature. I keep extras in my locker." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "You don't have to." "Trust me, I know what it's like to be new here. Everyone deserves a fighting chance." She helped him put on the gloves. And Marcus noticed her hands were also marked by hard work, small cuts and calluses that spoke of long hours and physical labor. "Thank you, Carmen. That's really kind." She shrugged. "My mum always said kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything. Besides, we're all just trying to make it through the day, right?" As the evening progressed, Marcus began to see the hotel's hierarchy in action. The servers, mostly young and attractive, were treated with casual indifference by the management. The kitchen staff was yelled at constantly, but tolerated because they were essential. And the cleaning crew, people like him and Carmen, were treated as barely human. They were the invisible army that kept the luxury machine running, but they might as well have been ghosts for all the recognition they received. Carmen, however, was different. She moved through the hotel with quiet efficiency, helping wherever she was needed. Marcus watched her assist an elderly guest who'd dropped her purse, comfort a new server who'd made a mistake, and even help Chef Morrison when he burned his hand on a hot pan. She treated everyone with the same respect, from the general manager to the newest dishwasher. "Dear Carmen," Patricia Thornfield's voice cut through the kitchen noise like a blade. "What are you doing down here? You're supposed to be setting up the VIP suites." "I finished the suites an hour ago, Mrs. Thornfield. I was just helping Mike get oriented." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mike is not your responsibility. Your job is housekeeping, not making friends with the help. Get back to your assigned duties." Carmen's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Marcus and whispered, "Don't let her get to you. You're doing fine." As Carmen walked away, Patricia turned her attention to Marcus. "And you, Mike, if you have time to chat, you have time to work faster. The gala guests will be arriving soon, and I won't have this kitchen looking like a disaster zone." Marcus bit back the response that came naturally to him. In his real life, no one spoke to him that way. In his real life, Patricia Thornfield would be apologizing for even thinking such thoughts. But Mike Johnson had no power, no influence, no recourse except to nod and work harder. The gala began at 7 o'clock, and Marcus could hear the sounds of arrival through the kitchen doors. Expensive cars pulling up, laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. This was his world, the world he'd inhabited for years. He knew many of the guests personally, had done business with them, had shared meals and made deals worth millions. Tonight, they were just voices beyond a door, living in a reality that felt impossibly distant from the dish pit where he stood. "Mike!" Chef Morrison's voice boomed across the kitchen. "We need someone to help serve. One of the servers called in sick, and we're short-handed. You ever done serving before?" Marcus almost laughed. He'd been served at countless events like this, but serve, never. "No, sir, but I'm willing to learn." "Carmen," Morrison shouted, "show Mike how to carry a tray without dropping it, and make it fast." Carmen appeared with a serving tray and a patient smile. "Okay, it's all about balance and confidence. Keep the tray level, move smoothly, and always be aware of where you're going." She demonstrated, moving with a grace that made it look effortless. Marcus tried to copy her movements, but the tray wobbled dangerously. Carmen steadied it with one hand. "Don't overthink it. Just breathe and trust yourself." After a few more attempts, Marcus felt confident enough to try. Carmen handed him a tray of champagne glasses. "You'll be fine. Just remember, you're invisible to them. That can be a blessing." Marcus walked through the service door and into the ballroom, and the transformation was startling. Gone was the harsh fluorescent lighting and industrial efficiency of the kitchen. Here was the world he knew: crystal chandeliers, silk-draped tables, women in evening gowns and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers instead of detergent and grease. But Carmen was right. He was invisible. Guests took champagne from his tray without looking at him, without saying thank you, without acknowledging his existence in any way. He was a function, not a person. A champagne-dispensing machine in human form. Excuse me." The voice belonged to a woman Marcus recognized immediately, Victoria Sterling, wife of a prominent real estate developer and one of the city's most notorious social climbers. In his real life, she fawned over him shamelessly, always angling for business connections or social advancement. Tonight, she looked at him with barely concealed disgust. "This champagne is warm," she said, holding out her glass like it was contaminated. "Bring me a cold one immediately." Marcus nodded and took the glass. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Victoria didn't wait for him to leave before turning to her companion. "The help they hire these days is just appalling. Look at him. He looks like he hasn't bathed in a week." Marcus had showered that morning, but he understood her meaning. His clothes were cheap, his appearance deliberately disheveled. To Victoria, that made him less than human, unworthy of basic courtesy or respect. He returned with a fresh glass of champagne, properly chilled. Victoria took it without acknowledgement and continued her conversation as if he'd never existed. Marcus moved on, serving other guests, observing their behavior with new eyes. These were people he'd considered friends, colleagues, peers. Tonight, they revealed themselves in ways they never would have in his presence as Marcus Williams. "But the homeless problem in this city is getting out of hand," he heard one man say to his dinner companion. "They should just round them all up and put them somewhere else, out of sight, out of mind." "I completely agree," the woman replied. "I had to walk past one of them yesterday, and the smell was just nauseating. They choose to live that way, you know. There are programs available if they really wanted help." Marcus knew the man speaking, Richard Blackwood, CEO of a major investment firm. Marcus had played golf with him just 2 weeks ago. Richard had seemed reasonable, even compassionate, when discussing social issues over brandy in the clubhouse. Tonight, surrounded by his peers and believing himself unobserved by anyone who mattered, his true feelings emerged. The evening continued, and Marcus collected a catalogue of casual cruelties and thoughtless prejudices. Guests complained about the service, the food, the temperature, always within earshot of the staff, never considering that these were real people with feelings and dignity. They spoke about the poor, the unemployed, the struggling as if they were a different species, inherently flawed and deserving of their circumstances. But then something happened that changed everything. Marcus was refilling water glasses at a table near the back of the ballroom when he heard a commotion near the kitchen doors. Carmen had emerged carrying a tray of desserts, but one of the guests, clearly intoxicated, had bumped into her. The tray crashed to the floor, sending chocolate mousse and raspberry coulis across the pristine white carpet. "You clumsy idiot!" the man shouted, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Look what you've done to my shoes. These are custom Italian leather." Carmen immediately dropped to her knees, trying to clean up the mess with napkins from her apron. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get this cleaned up right away." "Sorry doesn't replace $1,000 shoes." The man was getting louder, drawing more attention. "Where's the manager? I want this incompetent fool fired immediately." Marcus watched in horror as the scene unfolded. Carmen's face was flushed with embarrassment, but she continued cleaning, her movements quick and efficient despite her obvious distress. Other guests had stopped their conversations to watch, some with amusement, others with the detached interest of spectators at a gladiatorial contest. Patricia Thornfield appeared as if summoned by the commotion. She took one look at the situation, and her face hardened. "Carmen, what happened here?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thornfield. Mr. Davidson bumped into me, and I lost control of the tray. I take full responsibility." "She's lying!" Davidson slurred, swaying slightly. "She wasn't watching where she was going, probably on drugs or something." "You people usually are." The racial undertone in Davidson's comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. Carmen's face went pale, but she said nothing, just continued cleaning the carpet with quiet dignity. "Carmen, you're fired," Patricia said without hesitation. "Collect your things and leave immediately. Mr. Davidson, I sincerely apologize for this incident. The hotel will of course cover the cost of replacing your shoes." Marcus felt something snap inside him. This was wrong on every level. Carmen had done nothing but try to do her job, and now she was being sacrificed to appease a drunk bigot who couldn't even stand straight. The injustice of it burned in his chest like acid. But what could Mike Johnson do? He was just a dishwasher, as powerless as Carmen, as invisible as every other member of the service staff. If he spoke up, he'd be fired too, and nothing would change except that 2 people would be unemployed instead of 1. Carmen stood slowly, her dignity intact despite everything. She untied her apron and handed it to Patricia. "I understand, Mrs. Thornfield. Thank you for the opportunity." As she walked toward the service door, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He stepped forward, blocking her path. "Carmen, wait." She looked at him with confusion. "Mike, don't. It's not worth it." But Marcus wasn't thinking about worth or consequences. He was thinking about his mother, who had worked 3 jobs to put him through college. He was thinking about every person who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or treated as less than human because of their circumstances. He was thinking about the kind of man he wanted to be, not just as Marcus Williams, but as a human being. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom, "I saw what happened. Mr. Davidson was intoxicated and bumped into Carmen. It wasn't her fault." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me? You're a dishwasher. No one asked for your opinion." "Maybe not," Marcus replied, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. "But sometimes the right thing to do doesn't require permission." Davidson lurched forward, his face red with rage. "How dare you? You're just another one of them, probably covering for your girlfriend. Security, get these people out of here." The ballroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. Marcus could feel the hostility radiating from the crowd, but he also saw something else. Carmen looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and concern, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mike, please," she whispered, "don't lose your job because of me." But Marcus was done being Mike Johnson. He was done with the experiment, done with the pretense, done with watching good people suffer while bad people prospered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling to a contact he'd never thought he'd need in a situation like this. "Patricia," he said, his voice now carrying the authority that came naturally to him. "And I think there's been a misunderstanding." Something in his tone made her pause. The confidence, the way he said her name without deference, the sudden change in his posture. For the first time that evening, she really looked at him. Marcus hit the call button and waited. When the voice answered, he spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "James, it's Marcus Williams. I'm at the Grandview Hotel, and I need you to bring my car around to the main entrance. Yes, the Lamborghini, and bring my identification." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Patricia's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then absolute horror. Around them, guests began to whisper more urgently, some pulling out their phones to search for photos. You're Marcus Williams." Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. "I am. And Carmen Rodriguez is not fired. In fact, she's promoted, effective immediately. She's the new assistant manager of guest services, with a salary of $80,000 a year and full benefits." Carmen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mr. Williams, I don't understand." Marcus turned to her, and for the first time that evening, he smiled genuinely. "And Carmen, for the past 4 hours, you've been the only person in this entire hotel who treated me with basic human dignity. You helped me when I was struggling. You showed me kindness when everyone else showed me contempt. And you did it all without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He turned back to Patricia, whose face had gone ashen. "As for you, Patricia, you're fired, effective immediately. I'll be speaking with the hotel's board of directors tomorrow about finding new management that understands that every employee deserves respect, regardless of their position." "But Mr. Williams," Patricia stammered, "I had no idea. If I had known who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus said, his voice cutting through her excuses. "You treated me badly because you thought I was powerless. You fired Carmen because you thought she was expendable. You enabled Davidson's bigotry because you thought it was profitable. None of that changes based on who I am. It only changes based on who you are. Davidson, who had been growing more agitated by the minute, suddenly lunged forward. This is ridiculous. You can't just waltz in here and... He never finished the sentence. Hotel security, who had been watching the situation unfold, stepped in to restrain him. But the damage was done. The entire ballroom had witnessed a masterclass in privilege, prejudice, and the power of treating people with dignity. Marcus's driver appeared at the ballroom entrance, holding a garment bag and looking slightly confused by the scene before him. Marcus walked over, took the bag, and returned to Carmen. "Carmen, I have a proposition for you. I own several hotels in this city, and I need someone to help me ensure that every employee is treated with the respect they deserve. Someone who understands what it's like to work hard for every dollar. Someone who knows the value of kindness. Would you be interested in that position?" Carmen was crying now, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "Mr. Williams, Yes, absolutely. Good. Report to my office Monday morning. We have a lot of work to do." As Marcus prepared to leave, he turned to address the ballroom one final time. The guests, many of whom he recognized, looked at him with a mixture of shame and calculation. They were already trying to figure out how to spin this, how to distance themselves from the evening's events. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room, "tonight you've seen something that happens every day in this city, in this country, around the world. Good people are dismissed, disrespected, and discarded because of assumptions about their worth based on their appearance, their job, their circumstances. Carmen Rodriguez is worth 10 of most of the people in this room, but you would never have known that because you never bothered to look." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I challenge each of you to think about how you treat the people who serve you, who clean your offices, who make your lives comfortable. They are not invisible. They are not disposable. They are human beings who deserve your respect." Marcus walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one more time. "Oh, and Davidson, your membership to my country club is revoked permanently." The drive home was quiet. Carmen sat in the passenger seat of the Lamborghini, still in shock, still processing everything that had happened. Marcus had offered to have his driver take her home, but she'd asked if she could ride with him. She had questions, she said. She needed to understand. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "The whole thing, I mean, pretending to be someone else, working in the kitchen. Why?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I wanted to know the truth. About people, about myself, about the world I live in. I thought I understood inequality, thought I was doing enough by writing checks to charity and attending fundraisers. But I realized I was living in a bubble, surrounded by people who told me what I wanted to hear." "And what did you learn?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I learned that kindness is rare and precious. I learned that most people's compassion is conditional, based on what they think you can do for them. And I learned that there are still people like you in the world, people who choose to be good, not because it benefits them, but because it's who they are." Carmen wiped her eyes with a tissue Marcus had given her. "I can't believe this is real. This morning I was worried about paying my rent, and now you have a chance to make a real difference. Carmen, I meant what I said about the job. I need someone who understands what it's like to struggle, someone who won't forget where they came from. Will you help me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, "but I have one condition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. What's that?" "Elena Rodriguez, the woman who was turned away from the interview today. She's my aunt. She's been looking for work for 6 months, and she's one of the hardest working people I know. Can we find something for her too?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "I consider it done." As they pulled up to Carmen's apartment building, a modest complex in a working-class neighborhood, Marcus realized something had fundamentally changed in him. The experiment had been about understanding how others behaved, but it had ended up revealing something about himself. For years, he'd been Marcus Williams, the billionaire, defined by his wealth and success. Tonight, for just a few hours, he'd been Mike Johnson, defined by nothing but his actions and character. "Carmen," he said, as she prepared to get out of the car. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me who I want to be." The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting of his company's board of directors. He announced a new initiative. Every executive would spend 1 week each year working in an entry-level position in one of their properties, without revealing their identity. They would experience firsthand how their employees were treated, how their policies affected real people. The board was resistant at first, but Marcus was insistent. If we're going to lead these companies, we need to understand every level of the operation. We need to remember that behind every position, every policy, every decision, there are real people with real lives. Within 6 months, the Williams Industries employee satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. Turnover decreased, productivity increased, and the company became known as one of the best places to work in the city. Other companies began to adopt similar programs, and Marcus found himself speaking at conferences about the importance of empathetic leadership. Carmen thrived in her new role, implementing training programs that emphasized respect and dignity for all employees. She created mentorship opportunities for entry-level workers and established a fund to help employees facing financial emergencies. Elena was hired as a supervisor in the housekeeping department and quickly became one of the most respected managers in the company. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. He no longer attended charity galas as a way to assuage his conscience. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and got involved in the actual work of helping people. He funded job training programs, supported small businesses in underserved communities, and always remembered the lesson Carmen had taught him. Kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything. 6 months after that night at the Grandview Hotel, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a conference on social responsibility. As he prepared his remarks, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. He'd started the experiment thinking he would learn about other people. Instead, he'd learned about himself. The most powerful moment came when Carmen, now a successful executive in her own right, introduced him at the conference. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I'd like you to meet someone who taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the impact we have on other people's lives. Someone who showed me that the most important question we can ask isn't, 'What can you do for me?' but 'What can I do for you?'" As Marcus took the stage, he looked out at the audience and saw faces that reminded him of that night in the hotel kitchen. Some were dressed in expensive suits, others in more modest attire, but he no longer saw them as categories or classes. He saw them as individuals, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own capacity for both cruelty and kindness. 6 months ago, he began, I thought I knew what it meant to be successful. I had money, power, influence. I thought that made me important. But I learned something that night that changed everything. We are not defined by what we have, but by how we treat those who have less. We are not measured by our wealth, but by our willingness to lift others up. He paused, looking directly at Carmen, who was sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we meet someone who shows us what it really means to be rich, not in money, but in character, not in possessions, but in compassion. Carmen Rodriguez made me wealthy in ways I never knew were possible, and for that I will be forever grateful. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about a young woman in a hotel uniform who had offered kindness to a stranger, not because she had to, but because that's who she was. He was thinking about how one moment of genuine human connection had changed not just his perspective, but his entire life. As the applause finally died down, Marcus made a silent promise to himself and to Carmen. He would never forget the lesson of that night. He would never again take his privilege for granted, never again assume that his wealth made him better than anyone else, and never again underestimate the power of simple human kindness. Because in the end, that's what the experiment had really taught him. It wasn't about rich or poor, powerful or powerless. It was about the choice we all make every day, to see each other as human beings worthy of respect, or to look right through each other as if we don't exist. Carmen had chosen to see him, and in doing so, she had saved them both. If this story moved you the way it moved me, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button because stories like this need to be shared. Second, subscribe and hit the notification bell because I have more incredible true stories that will restore your faith in humanity. And third, tell me in the comments about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness, or when you had the chance to be kind to someone who couldn't do anything for you in return. Because those moments, those simple acts of human decency, are what make us who we really are. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything.